Hands up, you trespassing on private property.
Officer, I am the owner of this building. My name is Dr. Simone Sterling. If you look at the brass plaque beside the door, you'll see.
Anyone can buy a sign. Turn around. Hands behind your back. Now.
Officer, you're making a horrible mistake.
What Officer Brent Miller didn't know was that in the next 4 minutes, his routine patrol stop would transform into a federal civil rights incident that would cost the city of Atlanta $3.4 million, destroy his career, and send him to state prison for 18 months. The date was October 23, 2022. The time was 10:47 p.m. The location was the corner of Peachtree and 14th Street in Midtown Atlanta, directly in front of the Sterling Heart and Vascular Institute. Dr. Simone Sterling had just finished reviewing surgical charts for the following morning's open heart procedure. She stood on the sidewalk she had walked 1,000 times before, her Burberry trench coat buttoned against the autumn chill, her leather Toomey briefcase in her left hand, her office keys in her right. She was 30 seconds away from locking the glass doors of her private practice when the blue lights flooded the street behind her. Officer Miller, a 10-year veteran of the Atlanta Police Department, saw a black woman in an expensive coat standing in front of a medical office at nearly 11 o'clock at night. He didn't see a doctor. He saw an opportunity. Miller later testified that he believed Dr. Sterling matched the description of a burglary suspect, a claim that would unravel spectacularly when prosecutors pointed out that no burglary had been reported in that district for 6 weeks. The bodycam footage, released 3 months later after a court order, shows Miller exiting his patrol vehicle with his hand already resting on his service weapon. His partner, Officer Danny Reeves, remained in the passenger seat, later claiming he assumed it was a routine interaction. What the footage captures next is a masterclass in how implicit bias, unchecked authority, and procedural failures can converge into a constitutional nightmare. Dr. Simone Sterling was not raised in boardrooms or country clubs. She was raised in the shadows of the Englewood neighborhood on Chicago's South Side, where her grandmother, Loretta Mae Sterling, worked double shifts as a hospital custodian to keep Simone and her younger brother fed and safe. Loretta Mae had a saying that she repeated like scripture every morning before Simone left for school. "Baby, knowledge is the only armor they can't pierce. You get your education, and you take it where they don't expect you to be." Simone listened. She absorbed every word. At 17, Simone Sterling graduated valedictorian from her public high school with a full academic scholarship to the University of Illinois. 4 years later, she earned her Bachelor of Science in Biology with a 4.0 grade point average. She applied to 15 medical schools. Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine accepted her with a research fellowship in cardiovascular surgery. Her mother, Angela Sterling, worked 3 jobs to help cover living expenses that the fellowship didn't touch. Angela cleaned offices at night, worked retail on weekends, and did medical billing from home during the early morning hours. Simone saw every sacrifice. She felt the weight of every dollar her mother scraped together. That weight became fuel. At Johns Hopkins, Dr. Sterling didn't just excel, she dominated. She published 6 peer-reviewed papers on minimally invasive cardiac procedures before completing her residency. She was recruited by the United States Air Force Medical Corps and served 4 years as a major, performing life-saving surgeries on service members in field hospitals across 3 continents. When she returned to civilian life at 34, she was not the same young woman who had left Chicago. She was a weapon of precision, discipline, and unshakable composure. Dr. Sterling joined Atlanta Medical Center as an attending cardiothoracic surgeon in 2015. Within 3 years, she was promoted to chief of cardiothoracic surgery, becoming the first black woman to hold that title in the hospital's 92-year history. Her surgical success rate was legendary, 98.6%. Patients flew from across the country to be operated on by her hands. Those hands were insured by the hospital for $12 million. Those same hands were now being twisted into steel handcuffs on a public sidewalk because Officer Brent Miller refused to verify her identity. The bodycam footage shows Dr. Sterling attempting to turn toward the door to point at the brass plaque engraved with her name and credentials. Miller interprets this as an attempt to flee or barricade herself inside. He lunges forward, wraps his arm around her neck, and drives her face first onto the concrete. The sound of her briefcase hitting the ground is followed by the unmistakable crack of bone-meeting pavement. Dr. Sterling's wrist fractures on impact, a hairline fracture to the scaphoid bone. For a thoracic surgeon, this is not a minor injury, it is a career-ending threat. Miller wrenches her arms behind her back, ignoring her calm but firm statement that she is a physician and the building owner. He clicks the cuffs tight, too tight. The bodycam audio captures Dr. Sterling's breathing, controlled and steady despite the pain, as she recites her rights under the 4th Amendment. Officer, you do not have probable cause for this detention. I am standing in front of my own property. I have committed no crime. You are violating my constitutional rights under the Fourth Amendment protection against unreasonable searches and seizures. I am invoking my right to remain silent, and I am requesting legal representation. Miller responds by telling her to shut up and stop resisting. She wasn't resisting, she was documenting. Across the street, a Ring doorbell camera mounted on the entrance of a luxury apartment building captured the entire interaction in high definition. Two medical residents, Dr. Keisha Brown and Dr. Raj Patel, who had been working late at the hospital, pulled up to the curb just as Miller was shoving Dr. Sterling into the back of his patrol car. Dr. Brown immediately began recording on her cell phone. Dr. Patel called 911 to report what he described as an unlawful arrest of our chief of surgery. The dispatcher, confused, asked him to repeat himself. He did, 3 times. Miller's incident report, filed at 11:32 p.m. that night, contains multiple fabrications. He claimed that Dr. Sterling refused to identify herself, which was false. The body cam proves she provided her name, title, and medical license number within the first 60 seconds of contact. He claimed she attempted to flee into the building, which was false. She turned toward the door to show him the plaque. He claimed she resisted arrest with violence, which was categorically false. She never raised her voice, never made a threatening movement, and never physically resisted. Miller's report also claimed he had reasonable suspicion that Dr. Sterling matched the description of a burglary suspect. When pressed during deposition, Miller could not provide a description of the alleged suspect beyond a black female, mid-30s to 40s, wearing dark clothing. The absurdity of the claim became even more glaring when prosecutors revealed that the burglary suspect Miller referenced had been apprehended 6 weeks earlier in a completely different precinct. There was no active burglary investigation in Midtown Atlanta on October 23rd. Miller had invented a justification after the fact. This is called post hoc rationalization, and it is a cornerstone of unlawful policing. Dr. Sterling spent 4 hours in custody at the Fulton County Detention Center before her attorney, Marcus Tillman of Tillman and Associates, secured her release. During those 4 hours, she was denied medical attention for her fractured wrist. She was photographed, fingerprinted, and booked on charges of criminal trespass and obstruction of a law enforcement officer. Both charges would later be dismissed with prejudice by a judge who called the arrest an embarrassment to the justice system. The lawsuit filed by Dr. Sterling's legal team on December 1st, 2022 was not a typical civil rights complaint. It was a surgical dissection of systemic failure. The complaint named Officer Brent Miller, Officer Danny Reeves, the Atlanta Police Department, the City of Atlanta, and Police Chief Darnell Washington as defendants. The causes of action were devastating in their specificity. Count 1, violation of the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution prohibiting unreasonable searches and seizures. The complaint argued that Miller lacked any articulable reasonable suspicion, let alone probable cause, to detain Dr. Sterling. Count 2, violation of Title 42 United States Code, Section 1983, civil action for deprivation of rights. This federal statute allows individuals to sue state actors who violate their constitutional rights under color of law. Count 3, unlawful use of force under the Fourth Amendment. The tackle, the neck restraint, and the overly tight handcuffs constituted excessive force against a non-resisting individual. Count 4, malicious prosecution. Officer Miller fabricated evidence in his report to justify an arrest that had no legal foundation. Count 5, negligent supervision and failure to train. This count targeted the city directly. Officer Brent Miller had 12 prior complaints filed against him for bias-based policing, aggressive interrogation tactics, and inappropriate use of force. None of those complaints had resulted in meaningful discipline. Miller had been promoted twice despite a documented pattern of targeting professional black women. The city's failure to act on those complaints made them liable for the harm Miller inflicted on Dr. Sterling. The discovery process unearthed a damning internal memo from 2019 in which a senior officer had flagged Miller's behavior as a liability waiting to explode. That memo had been ignored. The lawsuit demanded compensatory damages, punitive damages, injunctive relief requiring policy reforms, and a public acknowledgement of wrongdoing. The city's initial response was to offer a settlement of $200,000 in exchange for Dr. Sterling's silence. Her attorney rejected it within 24 hours. The message was clear. This case was going to trial unless the city was prepared to meet the full scope of accountability. My grandmother used to tell me that some stories are too important to stay buried. She said the people who need to hear them most will never go looking for them unless someone like you makes sure they can't look away. You're here right now, reading these words, watching this story unfold, and that means you're part of something bigger than an algorithm or a scroll. You're part of the reason stories like Dr. Sterling's don't disappear into legal archives where only lawyers can find them. If you believe that accountability matters, if you believe that power without oversight is just tyranny in a uniform, then make sure this story reaches someone who needs to see it. Share Share it. Talk about it. Don't let it become another case number that gets settled quietly and forgotten loudly. The people who want you to stay silent are counting on your silence. Prove them wrong. Dr. Sterling's legal team didn't just want money. They wanted structural change. They wanted precedent. They wanted every officer in Georgia to think twice before assuming that a black woman in a nice coat couldn't possibly belong where she was standing. The city's defense strategy was predictable and insulting. They argued that Officer Miller had made an honest mistake and that Dr. Sterling's injuries were minimal and temporary. The defense team trotted out use of force experts who testified that Miller's actions were within policy for a suspected trespassing scenario. The problem with that defense was the evidence. The ring camera footage, the body cam footage, the testimony of the two medical residents, and the hospital's documentation of Dr. Sterling's fractured wrist painted a picture that no amount of spin could blur. The jury selection process for the trial became a national news event. Civil rights organizations packed the courtroom. Medical professional associations filed amicus briefs in support of Dr. Sterling. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution ran a front-page editorial titled "When Credentials Don't Matter, the Sterling Case and the Profiling Pandemic." The trial lasted 11 days. On day 4, the prosecution played the body cam footage in its entirety. The courtroom fell silent as Dr. Sterling's calm, measured voice filled the air, reciting her constitutional rights, while Officer Miller screamed at her to shut up. Several jurors were visibly shaken. On day 7, Dr. Sterling took the stand. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She spoke with the same clinical precision she used in the operating room. She described the sensation of her wrist snapping against the concrete. She described the fear that her career was over. She described the humiliation of being paraded through a police station in handcuffs while her colleagues and patients saw the mugshot that would later be leaked to the media. The defense attorney made the fatal mistake of asking Dr. Sterling if she had done anything to provoke Officer Miller's response. Her answer became the defining soundbite of the trial. "I existed in a space where he did not expect me to belong. That was my provocation." The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They returned a verdict in favor of Dr. Sterling on all counts. The compensatory damages, $1.2 million for pain and suffering, lost wages, and medical expenses. The punitive damages, $2.2 million, split between Officer Miller and the city of Atlanta. The total, $3.4 million. It was one of the largest civil rights settlements in Georgia history, involving a single plaintiff and a wrongful arrest. But the money was only the beginning of the consequences. Officer Brent Miller was terminated from the Atlanta Police Department on December 18, 2023, for conduct unbecoming an officer and falsifying an official report. The Georgia Peace Officer Standards and Training Council, known as POST, revoked his law enforcement certification permanently. Miller would never work as a police officer again in any jurisdiction in the United States, but the case didn't end with his firing. The Fulton County District Attorney's Office, under pressure from the medical community, the NAACP, and a coalition of civil rights attorneys, opened a criminal investigation into Miller's conduct. On March 9, 2024, a grand jury indicted Miller on 2 felony charges: aggravated assault under Georgia Code Section 16-521 and violation of oath by a public officer under Georgia Code Section 1610-1. The aggravated assault charge stemmed from the fact that Miller's use of force caused serious bodily injury, the fractured wrist, to a person who posed no threat. The violation of oath charge addressed Miller's fabrication of evidence in his incident report, which prosecutors argued was a willful betrayal of his sworn duty to uphold the law. Miller's criminal trial began on August 12, 2024. His defense was that he had acted in good faith based on his training and experience. The prosecution destroyed that defense by calling 12 witnesses, including 7 former arrestees, who testified to a pattern of behavior in which Miller targeted black professionals, fabricated probable cause, and used excessive force without justification. On September 6, 2024, the jury convicted Officer Brent Miller on both counts. On October 15, 2024, Judge Harold Thompson sentenced him to 18 months in state prison, followed by 3 years of probation. In his sentencing remarks, Judge Thompson said, "You wore a badge that represents justice, and you weaponized it against a woman whose only crime was being excellent in a place where you didn't expect her to be. You didn't just break the law, you broke the trust that holds this society together." Miller is currently serving his sentence at Lee Arrendale State Prison. His earliest possible release date is April 2026. Officer Danny Reeves, Miller's partner, was not charged criminally, but he was demoted and reassigned to administrative duties. He resigned from the department in January 2025. The Sterling case didn't just end careers, it changed laws. In March 2025, the Georgia State Legislature passed House Bill 1847, formerly titled the Accountability and Professional Integrity Act, but known universally as the Sterling Law. The bill was sponsored by Representative Keisha Moore, a Democrat from Atlanta, and co-sponsored by a bipartisan coalition of 12 legislators, including 3 Republicans who represented suburban districts where professional class black families had become a significant voting bloc. The Sterling Law includes three groundbreaking provisions. First, the professional verification mandate. This provision requires all Georgia law enforcement officers to utilize real-time database verification systems before escalating to physical force in any interaction involving a claim of property ownership, professional authority, or licensed occupation. If a person claims to be a doctor, a lawyer, a business owner, or any other licensed professional, the officer must verify that claim through a state database before making an arrest for trespass or related offenses. Failure to verify when technologically feasible is considered prima facie evidence of negligence in any subsequent civil rights lawsuit. Second, the liability shift provision. This is the part of the law that sent shockwaves through police unions across the state. The Sterling Law mandates that in cases where an officer is found liable for civil rights violations involving falsified reports or excessive force, up to 30% of any settlement or judgment must be paid from the police pension fund rather than from the general taxpayer fund. The goal is to create internal pressure within police departments for officers to hold each other accountable. If bad policing costs officers their retirement security, the theory goes, they will be more motivated to intervene when they see colleagues engaging in misconduct. The provision includes safeguards to ensure that officers who act in good faith are protected, but it eliminates the financial insulation that has historically allowed problem officers to inflict harm without consequence to their peers. Third, the mandatory de-escalation and implicit bias certification. Every law enforcement officer in Georgia must now complete 40 hours of training every 2 years on implicit bias, de-escalation tactics, and professional interaction protocols. The training is not conducted by police instructors. It is led by a board of community professionals, including doctors, lawyers, educators, and business owners. Dr. Simone Sterling serves as the co-chair of that board. She personally reviews the curriculum and has delivered the keynote address at 6 regional training sessions across the state. In her keynote, she tells her story. She shows the body cam footage. She shows her medical records, and then she asked the officers in the room a single question. If you had been Officer Miller that night, what would you have done differently? The Sterling Law went into effect on July 1st, 2025. In the first 6 months of implementation, complaints of racially biased policing in Georgia dropped by 18%. Use of force incidents involving professional class individuals dropped by 23%. The law is not perfect, and it has not eliminated the problem, but it has created a framework for accountability that did not exist before. Dr. Simone Sterling returned to full surgical duties in April 2023, 6 months after her wrist fracture healed. Her first surgery after the injury was a quadruple bypass on a 62-year-old black man who had specifically requested her because he had read about her case in the newspaper. The surgery was a success. As of February 2026, Dr. Sterling has performed over 400 additional cardiac procedures. Her success rate remains above 98%. She has expanded her private practice, the Sterling Heart and Vascular Institute, to include a second location in a historically underserved neighborhood on Atlanta's west side. Every Friday, she performs pro bono surgeries for uninsured patients who would otherwise die waiting for care they cannot afford. She has trained 17 cardiothoracic surgery fellows, 9 of whom are women of color. She was named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people in 2024. She has been invited to testify before Congress on police reform. She has received honorary doctorates from 3 universities. But when asked in interviews what she wants her legacy to be, Dr. Sterling does not talk about awards or accolades. She talks about her grandmother, Loretta Mae Sterling, who passed away in 2021, 1 year before the incident. "My grandmother told me that knowledge is armor," Dr. Sterling said in a televised interview with 60 Minutes. "But she also told me that armor is only useful if you're willing to walk into the fire." I walked into that fire on a sidewalk in Midtown Atlanta, and I walked out with a broken wrist and a clear mission. I will not let what happened to me happen to someone else without consequence. That is the only legacy that matters. The Sterling case is now taught in law schools across the country as a case study in Fourth Amendment litigation, qualified immunity challenges, and the intersection of race, class, and police power. It is cited in over 60 legal briefs filed in federal and state courts. It has been referenced in policy debates in 12 state legislatures. The $3.4 million settlement was not just compensation, it was a message. The 18-month prison sentence was not just punishment, it was precedent. The Sterling Law is not just legislation, it is a promise that power, when abused, will be met with accountability. Dr. Simone Sterling did not set out to become a civil rights icon. She set out to be a surgeon. But when the system failed her, she refused to accept that failure quietly. She fought back with the same precision, discipline, and unshakable composure that she brings to the operating room every single day, and she won.